Right, so I'm just going to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Chris Jackson. He has made history himself by being the first Black scientist to give a Christmas lecture, which you can actually go online and watch, which I have done myself, and it's fantastic, so I highly encourage that. He has given us his time this afternoon and is going to prepare a talk, and we're really grateful, so thank you so much, Chris. Please take it away.
No problem. Thank you, Sharon, and to the organisers for inviting me to talk. And you know, as a geologist, it's very odd to be asked to come and talk about well, things that are kind of by the side of the science that we often hold dear to us, right? We think science is this pure endeavour and it doesn't kind of clash with society. And obviously, the last year has told us that's not true, or reminded us it's not true. And increasingly, I find myself, even though I'm a scientist, being drawn into talking about broader issues. And that's what I'm going to talk about today: is race, racism, and representation. It's a kind of new talk which is going to weave its way through a few different things and be framed around my experience as one of the Royal Institution Christmas lecturers from last year. And to get us started, I want to really talk about representation and the value of that before highlighting some of the barriers to representing, in this case, for Black working class people. And then I'm going to kind of bring you right up to basically some stuff that's happened this week. So I was updating my talk even just before I came on this call about some of the issues that have raised their heads this week. So to get us going, I'm going to show you a trailer for a TV show I was in 2017, which will be the basis for our discussion around representation. So just enjoy the next minute and a half. So there you go, big glossy BBC Two TV show. There was the BBC did a really good job, but that's not really why I wanted to show that video. What I wanted to say is there was a big sequence in there where I abseiled in, and one of the first messages I got on Twitter afterwards was, why does it matter if some random Black guy goes on telly and abseils into a volcano? Because at this time, as it is now, the BBC didn't really have much representation of Black people across much of their science programming. So that kind of gave me a flavour of, you know, you get this opportunity to do something to positively represent, and literally within 5 minutes of the show ending, somebody will come on and try and decouple the science in that show and a broader discussion around representation. Why does representation matter despite what the random Twitter troll says? Well, it's because you can use these opportunities, not just being on TV, but I mean like walking into a local school, talking to a relative about, you know, your love for AI applications. You know, you can infuse them, right? So here's some examples of, you know, kind of inspirational encounters I had subsequent to that opportunity. So this was on the top left here is a drawing done by my middle daughter. At that time was about 2 years old. And these are some photos I was sent from parents of children who'd watched the show and were very inspired by what they'd seen about the diversity of people in there. In particular, this girl on the right-hand side in here was very excited having watched it in America. And she actually sent me this card which she'd drawn in. On the lower left here is a letter I got from a high school teacher in a predominantly Black high school in Chicago, saying that it was the first time that a lot of the students in that class had seen non-African Black people, as she described it, and said, you know, a lot of the children or pupils in that class were really surprised that there were Black people doing science around the world. So despite the headwinds pushing against us and you know, when we're trying to represent in any sort of space, I think, as I will come to at the end of this talk, these sorts of interactions, these sorts of communications justify, I feel, a large amount of the, I won't swear, but a lot of the junk that will come your way, and I will talk about now. Fast forward a few years, and you know, having done a few bits and pieces, we've just gone into lockdown. Some of you will remember this, the kind of second week of March. And I got this email in my inbox at about 11 minutes past 2, and it's from Don McDonald, who at that point in time was the head of education at the Royal Institution in London. And, you know, he says, hope as well, and everything's okay. And he said, we're at the early stage of development right now, but your name has come up in a number of conversations, and we'd love you to be involved again. Now, in 2019, I'd had like a short walk-on part in Hannah Fry's Christmas lecture, which was about, I think it was called Secrets and Lies, and it was around the power of mathematics in our everyday life. And I had a small part where I walked on and talked about forecasting volcanic eruptions. And he said, you know, would you have any time for a chat about what that might look like? And so, you know, I did. I went and talked to Dom. I spoke to the Royal Institution. It became very clear that they didn't just want me to be involved, they actually wanted me to be one of the co-presenters. Because remember, last year's Royal Institution's Christmas Lectures was a triplet. There was me, there was Helen Chetsky, and there was Tara Shine as well. And we talked about, you know, climate change in different spatial and temporal scales. So it was kind of clear they wanted me to do a big old shift on this. And remember, this was all going on in March, right? So I was, and this is important for a couple of slides' time. This email I got was in March, and this was before the murder of George Floyd, all right? So the Royal Institution had already made a conscious effort to go into something quite controversial with climate change. They'd also made a conscious effort to actually go into having a black lecturer in the form of me, and also having 2 women as well. And as I'll come on to in a moment, that's important because I was the first black person ever to give the Royal Institution's Christmas Lectures in 185 years. The first woman, I think, was Professor Susan Greenfield, which is in 1994. And Kevin Fong, I think, was in 2015. He was the first non-white presenter. So we're talking like literally yesterday. It sounds like these members clubs in London, doesn't it? Or golf clubs where women were admitted like 2 weeks ago. It was basically like that at the Royal Institution, pretty much, you know. And so instantly, with that in mind, in that kind of uniqueness space, if you will, there was another discussion to be had, clearly, wasn't there? It wasn't just a discussion to be had about climate change or the geological record of climate change. There was this important attendance story around the fact I was the first black lecturer ever, and why that was, what it meant, and what it might mean in the future. And so there was a decision kind of to be made at this point where I went with this, you know, or where the Royal Institution, to be fair to them, where they went with it as well. And now I spoke to them quite a lot, and they were very keen to have that as part of the discussion, to be quite self-reflective and critical of themselves as to how this had only happened now. And I think this is a general message which I think is powerful to many organizations, is to own a problem, is to recognize a problem, own it, and then be very vocal in the self-criticality, and support the people as well who are going out there to talk about these things. So as it was, here we go. You know, I was invited onto the Sky News, BBC. I kind of did a bunch of things, kind of fairly high profile interviews. This was just a screenshot and a tweet from Sky News with Niall Patterson, who's a really nice guy. But you can see on the right-hand side what happened within, again, minutes of that being broadcast on Sky News, and Sky News themselves tweeting about it. So what if you publicise this? The majority of people wouldn't even have batted an eyelid. You're fueling the fire, racism, with kind of reporting. The reporting being, he's the first black scientist to present the Royal Institution Christmas Lectures, which is a statement of fact. But then the fact I went on here and discussed why that might be was obviously quite provocative to some people, because they'd rather either believe racism doesn't exist, or they believe that racism only exists because we talk about it. He may be qualified, but if anyone believes whoever makes these decisions didn't willfully go out of their way to get a black professor in these times of wokeness and big virtual signaling, you're kidding yourself. This is as racist as picking a white person simply because they're white. So this person was saying, basically, you've got no quality. This is in August, remember, which I was saying was important in the context of the fact the emails were received in March. This is in August when it was all announced. They're basically saying I'm unqualified, right? You're just a black person. All of this is the Royal Institution, like all these lefty institutions, are trying to show how good they are, and this is inverse racism. You know, this person here, science isn't racist, and going back to my earlier point, which is that people think science exists in a vacuum, and actually it's just a bunch of techniques and skills we have. But you are an AI crowd on this call, and I'm preaching to the converted surely here, where you know that depending on how you train things and what problems you direct your algorithms towards to solve which particular problems are very much human-led endeavors. So to say science isn't racist is, I believe, truly false. And then this was just funny because it says, does he look like a scientist without his glasses? And there was a whole bunch in the thread about people saying they probably dressed me up so I look clever, which was really good. So we pushed on, okay, you know, despite all of that, we went away, we did all the production, we wrote the script, we planned the demos. This was all going on through the summer. So this was about a 7-month job, right? We filmed on the 12th, 13th and 14th, I think, of December. That email came to me in the middle of March, and we started the production writing around about May, June time. So this was a long process to make what effectively boiled down to, in my lecture, a 58-minute TV show. It was picked up by a large number of media outlets. The Times did a piece in their magazine, their Sunday magazine, by Susie Misia. What was good in that was, you know, they wanted to talk about the two things I've flagged here, you know, climate change and racism. They by this point, remember, this was coming out, I think, in November. These were two of the big agenda items, right? Climate change had been around, racism had obviously been around, but the summer had sort of brought it very much back into the public conscience. And they wanted to write about them as a coupled issue, and climate change and race and racism and disproportionate impacts on certain groups is a coupled issue anyway, right? The other thing I want to say here is the Royal Institution were actually very good. They and I, as I will come on to in a moment, sort of knew the backlash that was going to come following the announcement, and certainly in the lead up to the shows actually being aired as well. So they were very supportive behind the scenes and publicly with some of their statements around how they were supporting, especially me, because what was strange in this was that Tara Shine and Helen Chetsky, who were two women who were co-presenting it, I was drawing the majority of the fire from them, whereas you can imagine if it was a white man and two women, the women would have been very much the target of the abuse, but we are where we are. You know, I was in Science Focus magazines, that was good, you know, talking to like younger children and school children, that was really, you know, really opportunistic. You know, and then this was one of the first articles that came out, which was from The Guardian. And yeah, you know, they phrased it as I'm up for the fight, and you know, I did say that, and I'd say it again. But it was quite clear that by using that term, you know, to your average racist, to not put it mildly, you know, as soon as a black person says that, they're kind of getting a bit cross, right? Because, but what I meant by that is I knew what was coming even in August for later on in the year. But I did, as you can see here, see it as an opportunity to talk about a much broader set of issues, societal issues beyond racism, misogyny, transphobia, you know, there's the socioeconomic deprivation. There's a number of intersectional issues there, which I just thought, well, actually, screw it. I'm going to totally go for it when I've got a chance to talk about this broad range of things that I care very deeply about. I just wanted to pick up on a few quotes from this particular article from The Guardian. You know, I said there's clearly been black scientists in the past who've been qualified to give these lectures. And I really strongly felt that if we think historically, is it because Chris Jackson is the first person who's qualified, quote unquote, to give a Royal Institution Christmas lecture? That's clearly garbage, of course, because in the past there's been qualified black scientists, and what would the qualification be anyway, right? We don't even have a metric, which means that you get to give a talk at the RI, you don't. There's clearly been people who have been really good science communicators, but the reason it's not happened is because historically white male scientists have controlled that narrative around science and who is heard. If you go into the Royal Institution, if any of you have been there, it is like the whitest place in the world in terms of portraits and sculpture, okay? They're trying to change it, but you go in the toilets and you're peeing underneath Darwin, all right, pretty much in every stall. So that's one reason why. And so getting access to those spaces and access to those opportunities, when those opportunities are gatekept based around measures and metrics which have been designed by the majority demographic, so white males, okay, older white males, typically cis and probably heterosexual as well, that means that a lot of other people are going to fail, including white women, to live up to those standards and get their voices heard and have these opportunities. Because of this, when those opportunities come along, because there's a small number of us, in this case, black scientists, every opportunity is incredibly valuable to get right. So I actually felt quite considerable pressure going into this Royal Institution Christmas lecture, not to screw it up. And in fact, I felt more concerned about screwing the science up and for black people, for working class people, for geoscientists as well, than I did about annoying people in newspaper articles. I just thought, if I make a bad job of this, then all of the criticism I'd attracted up to that point would have been justified. Okay, and the problem was, if anybody watched the show, there's like 350 things that could go wrong in that show, so it was quite a high level of jeopardy. Going back to this point where, Dom sent this email in March, some think opportunities such as these are only given to black people at tokenism or virtue signaling. So these are people who had already made up their mind that the reason I've been selected was because of an event that hadn't even happened yet, right? Like I said, I was contacted about this before everything blew up last year, but people had still, in their minds, said that this was part of a kind of newly ignited push to push black people to the front of the queue, which is what some people seem to think. And just to summarize again that issue of me taking the chance to talk about a broad suite of issues, this is kind of captured here where I said science communication is not just about facts and conveyance of numbers and chemical equations, it's about all the messy stuff that goes on in science as well. And race and racism, misogyny and homophobia and transphobia are all part of that discussion. And that, again, to the audience I'm talking to now, you're probably way more aware of this, actually, than a lot of my colleagues would be, or people working in other areas of STEM, or even non-STEM disciplines, or people's perception of STEM disciplines, is that the science are things that happen naturally. They're part of the natural world, physics, chemistry, biology. But when we're using the word science, we're not just talking about that. I think it's just disingenuous to talk about science as being this thing which isn't under essentially the control of the scientists who apply the scientific method and tools to answer questions or solve problems. And that's what I tried to communicate there. And again, it kind of triggered a bunch of people to just be really horrible.
So let's go.
So I just wanted to show you a little bit of the first kind of 2 and a bit minutes of the Royal Institute of Christmas lectures, just to give you a sense as to what it was like, and also because this bit was very fun. And what I'm talking about at this clip at the start is basically going through 4.5 billion years of Earth history in 2 minutes, walking around the Royal Institution itself in central London. So just enjoy this as a bit of a break.
So let's go back to the beginning. 4.5 billion years ago, it was literally hell on Earth. 200 degrees Celsius. That's 4 to 5 times hotter than the hottest place on Earth today. So how did we go from that to the place we now call home? Well, to show you, I need you to join me on a 100-metre-long journey around the Royal Institution where every step will be 50 million years. We better get a move on. Back then, there would have been no life-giving oxygen in the atmosphere. Instead, it would have been a poisonous soup of carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia. This would have been a tough place to live. But then, about 3.8 billion years ago, the oceans formed and life appeared. Stromatolites were a trailblazer. These tiny microbial critters not only coped with the boiling temperatures and the toxic gases, but they were able to take carbon dioxide and turn it into life-giving oxygen. But for 2.25 billion years, until the end of this corridor, there was still hardly any oxygen in the atmosphere. Until the great oxygenation event, when some sun-worshipping bacteria learnt to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, producing food, with oxygen being the waste product. But the Earth's climate was restless. Sometimes it was snowball Earth. Other times, literally Club Tropicana. And then at other times, almost nothing, during the so-called boring billion. But 1 billion years ago, things got really exciting. Sponges appeared. And single-celled organisms gave way to complex multicellular life that we now know as animals. Life finds a way. And then, 541 million years ago, the Cambrian explosion, an eruption of life inside and outside the oceans, animals, plants, flowers. But then, 252 million years ago, 75% of all species went extinct. Life is never easy. And out of the ashes, new and more complex life evolved. dinosaurs came and went. The flightless ones anyway. Primates appeared, and then 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged. And after our 100-meter-long journey around the Royal Institution, all of civilization can fit on the width of a single human hair.
So that was kind of the opening skit from the whole lecture series and from my talk, and it was that was about 2.5 minutes long, and it took about 4 hours to film.
So let's go.
But it was a great, it was a really good experience. I got to kind of look vaguely like a scientist. This is the most I'll ever look like a scientist, with things exploding and pouring something into something else. And talking to kids on the screen via Zoom, because we were in the heart of, we just come out of the second lockdown then, was really challenging. But that science communication piece for me was still really important to retain. And this picture in the bottom right is just to tell you that it was an incredibly stressful experience. It was the recording of the show took about 2 days. But that was on the back of about 6 months of planning. So, it was a really, really hard part of my life, but I think it was worth it. So just to finish off the talk, really, that Royal Institution opportunity that I had last year was really, really good. It gives you then a platform to go and talk about, on top of all the stuff I did in the lead up to the RI Christmas Lecture, to talk about things subsequent to that. Emails that came in after that were really positive. This one here is from Bryn Onwenya, who's at University of Newcastle. He's as far as I'm aware, the only other black geoscientist in the UK. And he said, "It was fun to watch. You did us proud." And that was a really nice email, which, despite all of the criticisms that came after it that I received, this was a nice letter which actually came from my A-level geology teacher from my hometown. I'm from Derby. And he said, "Good grief, I used to teach him." So I've not spoken to Robin for about 20 years or so. So it was really nice to hear from him. And then also an email from a colleague in Scotland, in Edinburgh, actually, who was saying that, how important this was for geology as a discipline to see it being shown on TV. So, these are the sorts of, again, the things that happen that can be a very positive experience for you. So like I said, I just wanted to finish with a couple of slides about what's been going on this week, really. So Palav Ghosh had a newspaper, he had a news piece on BBC News at 10 talking about UK research and looking at institutional racism. This arose from a Royal Society report that came out in May. Jasmine Scarlett is here on the bottom left. She was in the piece as well. And it was talking about some of these data we see on the right here. It doesn't really matter what's on these graphs, because it turns out, unbelievably, that people who are hostile towards the notion of racism don't essentially care about data, right? Because the first thing you'll do is, racism exists. No, it doesn't. There's no data. Well, here's some pie charts and bar charts. I don't like those. Well, here's some other ones. I don't like those ones either. Okay, I do like these graphs, but I still don't believe there's anything such as racism, right? So, like, the numbers on the right-hand side of this slide don't really matter, but I'm just saying that this piece was written around this. And it was on BBC, it was on Radio 4 in the morning on Tuesday, which I didn't know was going to happen. The first thing I knew that it had gone beyond simply a 3-minute piece on the news at 10 on Monday night was when somebody sent me a text and said, "Chris, the Daily Mail have picked up on this piece." And you can see here, senior black scientists claim research, I love the claim, is institutionally racist. So they basically recycled the BBC piece from earlier in the day and added their own flavour to it, shall we say. It's probably the best way of describing it. You can imagine what the comment section was like. I think there's 176 comments below this piece. Not many people commented. There's somebody here who says, "Enough already." This person's just clearly had enough of talking about racism, with 448 upvotes and only 7 downvotes. It tells you a bit what the comment section of these pieces are like, right? This is interesting. Somebody who's just willfully misunderstanding the stats, given that 3.5% is roughly the proportion of said group as total of UK population. What they don't understand there is that the piece was never talking about 3.5% representation. They were talking about 3.5% of black academics versus 11% of white academics being professors as part of their, as a proportion of their respective demographic groups. And so you know, it's just willful, I won't say stupidity because I call people stupid, but it's a willful ignorance and a lack of engagement with the data, even when it's presented, to actually think about what it means. And then this is my favorite / least favorite one, which is science is a meritocracy, nothing else and nothing more. In other words, nothing to do with gender, race, religion, or morality. If you bring ideas, insights, knowledge, and thought to the table, you get on. It's that simple. And some of you on the call probably know my views on this already about meritocracy. It's complete garbage. But, you know, people just think that we need to be colorblind, quote unquote, and just, you know, measure people for what they're, you know, how good they are as scientists. And the whole point of Black History Month and a lot of the difficult conversations we've been having over the last year or so are based on this premise that that's not true. And you know, the same applies to gender, the same applies to race, the same applies to, I'm not sure what morality actually means now I think about it. The same applies to sexual or gender identity, of course. And there's an intersectional aspect here. So a lot of what we're talking about in terms of things which could help progress Black people in science or society or wherever it might be can also apply to these other protected characteristics, so, you know, these other historically underrepresented groups, including white working class people, which is the frustration I have with all of this hate which comes down the pipe. Is, you know, a lot of what we're saying is not a zero-sum game thing where we're trying to suppress, you know, the opportunities of white working class people. It's kind of bizarre. Anyway, last slide, what's next? So hopefully you've enjoyed that talk, you know, about racism and representation. This is all to say, you know, I think there's a number of different ways of representing. I think it doesn't have to be big, flashy stuff. I think it's important to do so, but it's equally as important to be aware of some of the hostility that will come back or may come back towards you. And then you at that point have to make a decision as to whether you believe that when you're given an opportunity as a scientist, whether you want to then unpack that and talk about broader issues. And I think I do, and I would encourage others to do likewise, but then to be aware of what's on the other side of that coin. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. If anyone has any questions, you can either pop it in the chat or raise a hand. I'm seeing a lot of claps because that was really, really interesting. I love that walk around the Royal Institution.
I'm still having therapy because of it.
Are there any chats? Oh yes, someone would like to ask a question. Ali Jaffrey, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? Ali? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. That was a fantastic presentation. And I just wanted to ask you on a kind of a personal level, how do you kind of stay strong with all this kind of negativity that's come your way? Because you're just trying to do your job.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to be professional.
Yeah.
You know, by kind of, I wouldn't say default, but we kind of end up in a default position of being just who we are. And that draws all this negativity. How have you managed to sort of cope and be strong?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a very good question. I think there's two bits to the answer. One is we're not always strong, right? There is a fluctuation in my energy level and my emotional state and my readiness and willingness to engage with these things when they come, right? So whether I'm oscillating at a higher overall level of willingness than somebody else is probably dictated by my character, my personality. You know, it's not a homogenous action for all Black people, right? So I think that's one thing we do. You know, I do oscillate, and there's times when I really can't engage. The second bit of the answer is then, you know, why do I maybe put up with more of this and why am I more vocal about this thing is because I just think it's really important. I think with the background I've had and realizing, you know, the luck and opportunities that have come my way, I think it's really important for me once I've been afforded that platform to try and use it, not to make more friends or more money or anything like that, but it's just to try and do the right thing. And you know, sometimes doing the right thing will make you unpopular and it may limit your own progress, and therefore you need to decide when you do it, right? You need to decide when you're going to do the right thing and when you're going to piss people off. But that's my decision, and that's what I talk to people about is realizing whether you believe you're doing the right thing for the right reasons. And for me, like, I'd find it hard to get out of bed if I, as a middle class now by education Black person in a comfortable circumstance, just pulled up the ladder and just forgot about all of the other people, not again just Black people. Let's just stress that again. That wouldn't sit right with me because of who I was before I became who I am now. So I think having that root in your historical self is really powerful, I think.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we actually have time for now. We do have a networking session at the end of the day in Gathertown. So if people want to come back and sort of network then, I think that link starts at about 5 o'clock. But thank you so much for all your time, Chris. I think you're still sharing. Are you still sharing? No, you're not. No, sorry, it's just you're massive on my screen. Thank you so much for your time. I found that so incredibly interesting, and it's great that we've sourced some questions for it as well. And I very much look forward to seeing what else you have to contribute as well. And you're getting a lot of thanks in the chat as well. So don't forget.
If anybody has any questions they want to send me either in the chat, which I might be able to see when I've come back from picking the kids up from school. But if not, then people want to email me, then I'm more than happy to talk about these things. So you can feel free to drop me an email at christopher.jackson@manchester.ac.uk, or follow me on Twitter or send me a message on Twitter. I'm more than happy to talk about any of the things raised here or any issues people are having themselves.
Fantastic. And this event will eventually find its way onto our YouTube channel as well. So people will be able to come back and watch it again and share it as well. So thank you very much.